welcome to this edition of 5 Things to Know for Tokyo 2020. We know that there was some big news this last week, and we're going to jump into that. We're going to talk about the spectators being banned from Tokyo 2020. We're going to talk about who are the people who still may be able to go to the Olympic Games or the Summer Games this summer in Tokyo. We're going to talk about the refund process. We're going to talk about some of the other things that are going on. It's really big news. I know a lot of us are pretty disappointed in terms of where we've reached in terms of the decision, but we're going to walk through all those things and kind of help us through as we think about it. So let's get on to number 1 here. So it was last Saturday that the news became official, that the Tokyo government, the government of Japan, the IOC, the IPC, and the Tokyo Organizing Committee, or TOCOG, reached the agreement that international spectators were going to be banned from Tokyo 2020. And what that simply means is anyone who is a general spectator, who has a ticket, who tries to come to Tokyo this summer will not be allowed entry. And with that, there's a whole lot of questions that are out there. Who's going to be able to come? Who are the types of people that will be able to come? What are the terms and conditions around those? What about refunds? What about tickets? What about hotels? What about airlines? What are the other things that are out there that people need to consider about? So let's go ahead and dig into some more of those. But as I know, most of us are really disappointed about where we've ended up for this summer, as much as we were looking forward to attending the event this summer in Tokyo. So let's get on to number 2. So there are 2 types of guests that may still end up at Tokyo 2020. The first group is marketing partners, or partners who have sponsored or potentially are working the event in terms of activations either globally, locally, and in terms of that. So that's one group. The other group is oftentimes called the Olympic and Paralympic family. And I think one of the things to be really clear about is Olympic and Paralympic family does not directly translate to families of athletes. Now, some families of athletes may be included in that, but the IOC has had a traditional definition which includes things like the IFs, the National Olympic Committees, broadcasting sponsors, and otherwise. So while it is not clearly stated about who and who is not included, people should not simply reach the conclusion that because it says Olympic family, that families of athletes are in fact allowed to attend Tokyo 2020. The other part of this is that as part of this announcement, and specifically with the banning of normal spectators, a playbook was announced specifically for the Olympic family. That playbook was produced in February, but only published here just a little over a week, just around a week ago with the announcement. And in that announcement, there's some pretty significant restrictions that anyone coming over as either one of these 2 parties will be for the first 14 days that are there. Not only will they have to take PCR tests 72 hours before they leave, they'll have to take a PCR test, on arrival in Japan, go straight to their hotel or their accommodations, and only be allowed to travel there to the event and back in special transportation. No pubs, no restaurants, no shops, none of that for the first 14 days. Now, there is going to be a list that comes out of permissible areas to go during that time, but looking at it's going to be pretty restricted for the first 14 days. After 14 days, it appears, based on the current documentation, that is no longer going to be the case, and you'll be able to go about, I would say, more normal and go to these other places like shops, like restaurants and more when you effectively end the quarantine. Now, of course, this was built back in February. I can't say where it's going to end up or if it even would change. We're speculating about that as we get closer towards July. But the thing is this, on one side, for people who are used to being able to go and do whatever they want within a given country, it's going to feel very, very restrictive for the Olympic family, for these marketing partners. But I know a number of people, including myself, that simply if they had the opportunity to go and enjoy even with those restrictions, they would of course do that. So that's kind of the situation in terms of the groups of people who may be able to go. So now let's go on and talk about number 3. Refunds are complicated and they're going to take some time. And I say that because there's a business problem that also coincides with the consumer problem, right? The consumer problem is I purchased tickets, I purchased a package, I reserved a hotel. I am not going to be allowed to go, and therefore I want my refund, right? That's the consumer perspective there. And the consumers, depending on where they are in the world, have different protections associated with that. And so that's clearly what the consumer problem is. The business problem is this. Most of the places that the tickets were sold, the hotels were reserved, any of those other types of items, those were done 8 years ago in 2013 when the bid for Tokyo 2020 was officially confirmed, and then the host city contract was created. And so those hotels, those bodies, those other intermediaries have all had the money for that period of time. And when you look at specifically like the ATRs, and there's different ones for different countries, they don't necessarily have the money to directly pay back the consumers at this point because they've paid the money for the tickets directly to the Tokyo Organizing Committee. And so to some extent, there is a wait to see what the Tokyo Organizing Committee does in terms of the timeline for refunds, which definitely puts the ATRs and the other folks in a difficult position, and that's specifically for tickets. Hotels are a bit more complicated. Lots of individuals had to prepay for their hotels and accommodations. There's been no details coming out about how they may be refunded for those. And then lastly, you think about tours, you think about airlines, you think about those other types of items. So I expect this to be, unfortunately, a little bit messy over the coming months, and hopefully very quickly there'll be some clear, concise communication that will come out across the world in terms of how consumers can seek their refunds and also get reimbursed for the event tickets that they bought that they will no longer be allowed to attend. All right, let's move on to number 4. What may seem crazy in the midst of all of this is that ticket holders internationally may also end up with the option to hold on to their tickets. Kingdom Sports produced an announcement earlier this week, and I think they're the only authorized ticket reseller or ATR to do this, that basically said as part of the refund process, you'll have 2 choices. One is you can request a refund from Tokyo 2020, at which time Tokyo 2020 refunds Kingdom Sports that they'll give you, or you can keep your tickets. Why would you keep your tickets? Well, there's a couple of reasons that you might decide to keep your tickets. I think the first is if you have friends or family potentially in Japan, or you have the ability to be in Japan during that time, you may want to keep those tickets. I think this is a bit of a surprise. Most were expecting that simply across the board, all the tickets that were purchased would be refunded. So if you do have friends that are, or family that live in Japan, you could keep your tickets and transfer to them. And the details say that you'll be provided PDFs or electronic tickets, so you don't have to worry about shipping those tickets all around the world. I think the other interesting thing here too is that in Japan, there's not been a single on sale of tickets. If we look back to what's happened in the tickets, there's only been 2 separate lotteries where people had to apply and hopefully you get an opportunity to purchase a set or subset of tickets. And a good number, up to 25% of people, returned their tickets last year when the event was postponed to 2021. So I think if you do have friends or family and you have purchased tickets for Tokyo 2020, that's definitely an option to allow your friends and family to attend. So let's move on to number 5. Some consumers who have officially been banned from Tokyo 2020 still have not given up yet. And what some of them are doing is they're keeping their airlines, they're keeping their hotels until a later date. And as in the last segment, they may elect to keep their tickets. And they're doing that with a hope that as things do improve, that they will, in fact, be able to attend Tokyo 2020 if they open up for tourism June, July, August, depending on where we are with the state of the pandemic. Now, this is not something that I would personally recommend. I mean, if you have a non-refundable flight, right, or if you have a refundable flight at a good rate, then maybe that's something you say, hey, I'll have a flyer on that. But you are potentially taking a good amount of risk between the flight, the hotel, and the tickets if you do continue to do that. That is what some consumers have done, and thinking, hey, in the worst case, what I can do is I have friends or family in Japan, and I can go ahead and transfer those in. We're still, with the Olympic torch relay starting earlier this week, we're still roughly a little over 100 days before the big event, and despite the recent decision this past week of spectators being banned, this is what I have heard directly from a few folks that I know in terms of keeping options open, even though they basically do understand in the current conditions that they will not be allowed to attend. That's it for this week on 5 things to know for Tokyo 2020. It's obviously a very complex environment that we're operating in right now. It's unprecedented in terms of an international group, actually all international spectators being banned from an Olympics event before. And as we go through the refund process, as we go through the cancellation process, I'll continue to provide updates and details, things that I'm hearing out there so that you know if you're not unable to get your refunds, what actions and next steps you can take. All right, I'll catch you next time.